Madam Speaker, it is an honor to have this opportunity to be back in the House. And in case anyone missed it, one of our members on the opposite side, starting out with the usual pejorative that the governing side likes to use, says, "Here comes the poet." And I just remind his children study me in school on the BGCSE and BJC curriculum. And I'm most appreciative to him and others who continue to buy the books for their children. So let me, because you mean it as a pejorative, let me say that we on this side, Madam Speaker, I heard something from the gallery. You should caution those in the gallery to mind their behavior. So again, Madam Speaker, we support this compendium of legislation, the Court of Appeal Amendment, the Supreme Court Amendment, the Court Services Bill, the Coroners Amendment Bill, the Magistrates Bill, and of course, Remuneration and Pensions Bill. Madam Speaker, I believe that the bills have been addressed with tremendous detail. Colleagues recount the fact that we have worked diligently on the Court Services Bill. We're happy that the government has advanced it further. We believe that these bills are a part of a broad effort by both administrations to move our system forward, both on the civil as well as criminal side. Madam Speaker, in many ways, it's safe to say that we are on the right road relative to our attempt to improve our country's reputation in terms of the civil court as well as on the criminal side. But we're not moving at the pace required, Madam Speaker, to address many of the fundamental issues that Bahamians have. I've had a historical challenge, the sense of urgency that we often demonstrate while in government, Madam Speaker. I've said it when we were in the chair. I've repeated it far more times since this administration has come to office, Madam Speaker. As I looked at the compendium of bills, Madam Speaker, what is clear is that there have been cries for a very long time for us to improve our system, and secondly, to ensure that there's separation of powers. We have taken issue with this administration, Madam Speaker, on both scores. And while I won't litigate that in tremendous detail, I would like to highlight just some examples of the concern that we have. Madam Speaker, one of the reasons I support an increase in justices is because, Madam Speaker, the backlog continues to be too large. The time that persons are seeking to get court dates, Madam Speaker, it's taking too long. And today, persons who need immediate responses or reasonable responses in a reasonable period of time have to wait till 2024. I'm understanding as far as 2025 before they can get a court date. We have to govern as if these are urgent matters that people are facing. And so when I hear some members on the other side patting themselves on the back or ridiculing members who are speaking because we're challenging them to do what they challenged us to do when we were in government, I conclude, Madam Speaker, that they must not be feeling the pain other people are experiencing in this country. There are persons who are waiting on judgments and have been waiting for years, some people 10 years, more, in terms of getting a judgment. So, Madam Speaker, there is a need for us to find various ways in making sure that justice is not delayed and, as a result, is denied. And so, Madam Speaker, any effort that this administration comes with that's reasonable, that can be helpful, our side, who've been measured in many ways when presented legislation to this House, we will support it. What we will do, though, is to remove the pressure when we say to them that we do not believe that they are moving with a sense of urgency. They don't spend enough time, Madam Speaker, in the Parliament, doing people's business, Madam Speaker. And even when they talk about creating a separation between, a sharper separation between the different organs of state, we could go to pieces of legislation and show where they have attempted to reduce that division and to make sure that the executive continues to wield control over other organs. Madam Speaker, let me give a couple of examples. We see it as in terms of the Public Accounts Committee. This government has attempted to keep public servants from appearing before the Public Accounts Committee to answer questions they are duty-bound to answer. And we say either the Attorney General was acting ultra-virus of the position that he had, or he was on instruction from the Prime Minister to prevent a permanent secretary who we requested to come before the Public Accounts Committee. We have seen in the amendment to the Public Financial Management Act, Madam Speaker, again, an attempt to weaken what the Public Accounts Committee can do. The oversight of the Public Accounts Committee ought to be where it is right now, with the legislature. And the executive, the more we reduce the control of the legislature over the Public Accounts Committee, the better it is for this country. And so, Madam Speaker, we hear them when they talk about the desire to provide greater autonomy to the Parliament. But we're not convinced that they are serious about this. And every measure that they bring, we will demonstrate our commitment to the independence of the judiciary, of the legislature, by supporting it. And we will challenge them at every turn where they seek to weaken legislation, gut legislation, so that the executive could claw back to itself more and more authority over the affairs of this country. We are different than they are, Madam Speaker. We believe in smaller government. This is an administration, Madam Speaker, that seeks to bloat the government. They're using now the government as an employment agency because they failed to grow the economy at the rate that they projected. And now that the roaring return in terms of growth of the economy, now that that is slowing down because of the pent-up demand not moving as quickly as they anticipated, they are unable to satisfy the demands of many members of the public for economic opportunities, for employment opportunities, and the state-owned enterprises that they promise to transform, they are now using as employment agencies. Very, very different than this group, Madam Speaker. And so, Madam Speaker, I wish to just focus for a moment on a report that several members on the other side have sought to dismiss. The IMF Article 4 report, this pre-publication, Madam Speaker, the government wishes to gloss over this, and they said, you know, let's wait until the final report comes before you cast any judgment. And so, but Madam Speaker, we intend to serve a warning to this administration. They have an opportunity to behave in a reasonable way, to stop the reckless spending that they are engaged in now, to make adjustments in the fiscal course that they are on. If they fail to do so, constrain spending, to sort out the priorities of governance, what will happen if they fail to act and act expeditiously, Madam Speaker? We're going to face more taxes from the administration that claimed it would not tax the public and ended up doing so. We are going to face greater cash crunch, Madam Speaker, and we're facing it. And I will litigate that issue further, Madam Speaker. But just before I continue, Madam Speaker, I want to pause because while we are in here doing the people's business, many Bahamians are grieving, Madam Speaker. And I wish to join colleagues on all sides in sending out condolences to so many Bahamian families who are hurting today as a result of the loss of loved ones. Madam Speaker, I wish to call by name just a few of them. Speaker, we lost just recently Beryl Simmons from Marco City, and Pastor Woodside, who is the founder of Tabernacle Baptist Academy, one of the most incredible schools that started out as a sporting power, then emerged as an arts as well as academic power, lost his wife just recently, Althea Woodside. The Honorable Kwesi Thompson and myself joined the family in attending that funeral and paying tribute to her. Nigel Mills, Jr., very young, promising Bahamian, just passed recently. Kenesha Roberts, Kevin Duncombe, Dotley Major, Monica Knowles, all persons who are part of the Marco City family. And of course, most tragically, many of us know Brenda Johnson, who lost Bernie just recently, over the last day and a half, and our heart goes out to her and to all of the families, and we want to let you know that we are praying for you and covering you in prayer. Madam Speaker, we don't believe in the I got you moments in politics or I told you so. But what is true that we have warned this administration multiple times, but in their arrogance, that poison that has toppled previous administration is in the process of toppling this one as well. In their arrogance, they have ignored the warnings. We said to them, on the heels of advice they received from a board they met in place at BPL, that a functioning hedge program in place. If you followed it, you get to save money. We saved 25 million, we're projected to save 55 million. They ignored the advice, and when prices increased for fuel, again, fuel costs went up 163% under this administration, and the cost of electricity itself skyrocketed. Members of the government lied about the fact that they did not receive advice. As a result, Bahamians are suffering. The Honorable member from St. Barnabas talked about Eleuthera. We continue to get calls from members of that community. Harbour Island, North Eleuthera, South Eleuthera. Even with a sitting chairman who we knew worked pretty hard to try and solve some issues there, obviously he couldn't get the support of his minister and couldn't get the support of his administration. And as a result, people are hurting in that island, and you could hear, the public could hear members opposite screaming at the member for St. Barnabas who's doing his job. In fact, their job. They have 2 members of parliament for Eleuthera. But they wouldn't stand up for their people and are upset that we are standing up for those persons, could you imagine, who do not have water to bathe many times. An economy that is contributing to this country on a consistent basis, contributing to the consolidated fund, but cannot get the services required. And yet members would heckle and make noise, as opposed to being quiet and quietly cheering for those soldiers who are raising the plight of these Bahamians. Madam Speaker, many of our people are hurting. They are hurting. And our duty is to raise their issues in this place and then to act in order to make a difference, Madam Speaker. In all our constituencies, we have people who are hurting. And so we have to be careful on what issues we decide to interrupt the cries of the people echoed by their representatives in this place, Madam Speaker. And so, Madam Speaker, I wish to refer to the IMF publication, the statement that highlighted some of the key findings from their recent mission. The Honorable member for East Grand Bahama, former Minister of Finance, we all had an opportunity to sit with them, as we've sat with them on previous occasions, to discuss issues related to the country. Madam Speaker, what we find so offensive is that each time we raise critical issues that have the potential to affect the reputation of this country, the side opposite attempts to play this patriotic card as if Bahamians are slow. We have been very careful each time we talk to international media or international agencies to put the interests of the Bahamian people and our country's reputation first. We understand, members of the government, that we have common detractors and enemies of our progress. We are no fans. We are no fans of a number of the multinational agencies who unfortunately don't follow the very rules that they set for us, whether it's members of the OECD or whether it's the European community. We understand that they often set rules that they themselves do not follow. We've been measured. But what we will not do is be dishonest about things we can get right as a country. And so, Madam Speaker, we have warned this administration to be measured in their statements, not to under-deliver, as they have been doing to the Bahamian people. This administration has sold the Bahamian people a bill of goods that they are responsible for the opening of the economy and the roaring back of the economy rather than pent-up demand simply being at work. They have sought to convince the public that there are no financial problems. We are ahead of revenue projections. We are doing well. We are clicking on all cylinders. But unfortunately, Madam Speaker, it doesn't explain why sub-practice who were working on the handful of homes that this government was repairing in Grand Bahama could not be paid from May. But they were paid, some of them were paid just in time for the by-election before the vote in order to get them on some roof because they were chasing the efforts we were making. Got paid just in time to be mobilized, to go to houses and say, we got you, I was mobilized. Madam Speaker, the cash crunch was on, Madam Speaker, because unfortunately, this government was not telling the public the truth, that there is a financial challenge we are facing because of their mixed up priorities and how they are managing the fiscal affairs of this country. And the IMF is but one of those agencies that treat them as a paragon of virtue or that they are all knowing and all seeing. But on occasion, these organizations have things that are useful to say that can help us better govern. Madam Speaker, of course, this publication of the IMF, Madam Speaker, is a preliminary report, but it provides some useful nuggets that if the Minister of Finance is attentive and present long enough, he can glean some things from and make adjustments. We have time, Madam Speaker, to do some things with the midterm budget debate coming up shortly. And so, Madam Speaker, let me read into the record, Madam Speaker, some of the concerns that we have. Madam Speaker, the actual Article 4 report will amplify and expand on the observations made in the brief statement that we've referenced here today. That report, Madam Speaker, no doubt makes for some interesting reading. But even in this brief statement, Madam Speaker, there are enough what we call troubling observations that should give this administration pause, that should give any serious-minded government pause. These observations are troubling, Madam Speaker, but they are not surprising. The opposition and others in the past, Madam Speaker, we were paying attention to questions of this administration. In fact, we warned and admonished this administration many times, over and over again. We knew that this day was coming. This is what I had to say, Madam Speaker, back during the most recent budget debate. In essence, I made the point that today, we have a budget that is seeking to add hundreds of millions more onto our national debt. They have put in no plan to rein in public spending, instead continuing on that path of greater and greater tax burdens to fuel lavish spending, Madam Speaker, and some would say secret, confidential contracts and settlements. Madam Speaker, I went on to comment about the increased revenues that have been outstripped by uncontrolled spending, however, which has resulted in increased deficits and increase in the national debt. This government is failing to lead our nation in a national conversation about careful priorities. This is back in the budget debate, Madam Speaker. As a result of net borrowing activities, central government net debt increased over the first 9 months of the current fiscal year by $290.8 million to a total of $11.1 billion, Madam Speaker. You remember the early days of bombing on the desk, standing ovation about how we increased the debt. People were enthusiastic. That energy has since left this administration, Madam Speaker. Sometimes they have to be reminded by someone. I heard the member, my good friend, had to remind people, shouldn't we be bombing on this? So they have to collaborate on when to bomb. Madam Speaker, so while the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, and this is what is amazing, you think he's shocked? Be shocked. When you hear the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance saying that he's shocked to hear that the IMF is indicating that his government will burst their budget deficit targets by almost 300%, equal to an unplanned 150 million hole in the budget. Madam Speaker, we on this side do not share his surprise. We could see it coming, Madam Speaker. We've been home long enough, focused enough on this economy to detect when there is a problem. And we don't need somebody to email us, text us, and tell us while we are elsewhere, otherwise engaged. Madam Speaker, we only have to pay attention to the scores of vendors and public servants who can't get their money on time. Big contractors are getting payments in small pieces. Small contractors many times are overlooked unless they cry long enough or loud enough for ZNS to tell them, tell them so that the government can the message. We only have to listen to the farm administrators and public officers as time on our farm islands, vendors cutting off credit. Familiar story, Speaker. We of doctors in NHI who can't partial payments or public servants whose deductions can't make it to the insurance company or the mortgage lender, Madam Speaker. We only have to pay attention to what is happening around us to know that the budget is not performing to expectation and that the fiscal hole is bigger than they have been claiming. So while our Prime Minister, who is, I understand, I'm advised, traveling once again, may be shocked, the rest of us residing in the Bahamas on a regular basis, we are not shocked. And the truth, Madam Speaker, is that the Prime Minister cannot be surprised. I mean, we can't accept that explanation, Madam Speaker, because the IMF is not the only international entity that is projecting that the Davis administration will burst its, you don't even say burst wide open, burst their own budget deficit projections, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I brought with me the S&P Global Ratings, the report. And on page 2 of their rating report on the Bahamas, dated September 16, 2023, the rating agency Standard & Poor's stated that they projected that the deficit for the fiscal year is to come in somewhere around 3.2% of GDP, a number that is even higher than the 2.6% GDP deficit projected by the IMF. That equals a sum north of 450 million, much higher than the 380 million deficit projected by the IMF. This was back in September that an international agency stated that it is, in their view, that this government would burst its budget projections wide open. And so I don't understand, Madam Speaker, how the Prime Minister could be shocked. Just like how we didn't understand how we could be shocked at the state of the hospital or the state of people's homes in West Grand Bahama and Bimini. So now we have two major international bodies that are stating that the reckless, unchecked spending of the Davis-Cooper administration will cause them. If we take the smaller projection, it will in fact, Madam Speaker, it will triple the planned budget deficit and cause 250 million or more in unplanned, unauthorized borrowing. So what does the Davis administration, the Davis-Cooper administration do with this admonishment and caution from major and significant international players? It sticks its head in the proverbial sand, Madam Speaker. And I think one of our colleagues alluded to it earlier. They go into spin mode, you know. It's just a difference of opinion. Our lawyers say one thing, their lawyers say another thing. You remember that, Madam Speaker, when it came to the illegal borrowing of the SDRs from Central Bank? And so, Madam Speaker, we have a concern about the Prime Minister's response, a concern about Michael Hal Peters' response. What's more troubling, Madam Speaker, is that this government refuses, absolutely refuses, to follow the law. Opposition and their employers, the people of the Bahamas, we know what the law says. The law says this government is legally required to provide quarterly and monthly budget reports in a timely fashion to allow all of us and analysts, locally and internationally, to assess the state of play of our finances. Madam Speaker, this government is habitually late, Madam Speaker. We wouldn't say it's intentional, but to bookend this, it's either it's intentional, which we believe it can't be, or they are failing to demonstrate that they're competent. Either way, it's a terrible scenario for the country, Madam Speaker. If you don't have the data, you can't do the proper analysis, and you have challenges in knowing where the country is going financially. Madam Speaker, 5 critical and legally required public reports should have already been laid, Madam Speaker, but this administration is failing to do so. Madam Speaker, we also once again demand that the government follow the law and properly constitute the Fiscal Responsibility Council and get them to release the now 6 outstanding reports going back to early 2022. Our Shadow for Finance has, Madam Speaker, spoken about this ad nauseum. It makes no difference to a deaf administration. Right now, the Bahamian public does not have a clue if the council is functioning, nor do they know why they have not produced one single report since the PLP took office. The Fiscal Responsibility Council, Madam Speaker, has a critical role as a nonpartisan, independent voice regarding the fiscal plans and performance of our government. We are only left to draw the most negative inferences as we speculate why, despite numerous promises, we have not yet gotten any substantive update back to this council. Madam Speaker, this is relevant to bread and butter issues for our people. And Madam Speaker, I'll get to that in just a moment to talk about the consequences of this, because the government would like the public to believe that this is not really relevant, that it really doesn't matter whether or not these reports are produced, or whether or not the IMF is accurate or not accurate, that it's really not that important, because in the past, they were off by a certain percentage point. Well, Madam Speaker, it does matter. It does, Madam Speaker, because your credit worthiness in the minds of lenders depend upon to what extent they could rely on the word of the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister and any of his ministers. If one, you can't get the data, that shakes the confidence of lenders. It shakes the confidence of investors. If, Madam Speaker, you are off dramatically in terms of what you project your deficit is, that too shakes the confidence of your lenders, and it shakes the confidence of your investors, Madam Speaker. The government has a chance, Madam Speaker, to correct its course of behavior, but it has a limited time to do so. And so, Madam Speaker, if I can just have just a couple of minutes, just to, Madam Speaker, I just wish to mention just a few things that the government ought to consider. One, it's important for the government to begin to follow what it had outlined in the fiscal strategy report. One, it will reform state-owned enterprises that continue to suck resources out of the consolidated fund, Madam Speaker, without producing the returns required. There has to be a real conversation and a course of action in how they are going to deal with bloated state-owned enterprises. Madam Speaker, there's a need for us, while we can tout the success in tourism, we have to be honest with the public that tourism increase in revenue has not proven to be sufficient, Madam Speaker, to offset, Madam Speaker, the risk that come with having a one-pony show. When tourism experiences external shocks, Madam Speaker, the country is put in a financial tailspin. This government has to engage in structural adjustments in our economy so that we can have other pillars on which this economy rests. That is the serious work of a dedicated Prime Minister and a cabinet that understands that this economy is not on autopilot. It requires careful work with all stakeholders to make sure we have multiple sectors operating at a high level so that when tourism numbers fall off, we have other means of generating revenue to sustain our country, Madam Speaker. And so this government, unfortunately, is squandering a marvelous opportunity they have had, an opportunity afforded to them by an economy that came roaring back, Madam Speaker. The revenue from that roaring back economy was not used, Madam Speaker, to transform this economy structurally. And so, Madam Speaker, it is our hope that come February, this government would have moved swiftly enough, Madam Speaker, to make adjustments in how they are spending. One, they must curtail spending, Madam Speaker. Secondly, Madam Speaker, they must strengthen the social safety net, Madam Speaker, by taking the VAT of breadbasket items, taking VAT of medicine, ensuring that they are not strangling insurance companies with the invasive policies that they are engaged in at the moment, Madam Speaker. And finally, Madam Speaker, this administration has to talk straight to the Bahamian people. Our population, Madam Speaker, is mature enough if we were to have a conversation with them about the challenges we face and about the adjustments we must make as a country, we believe that this public is willing to listen and work. Unfortunately, this administration is too busy overselling and under-delivering, too busy spending money that they do not have and seeking to earn it back by taxing the very people who are forced to pay it. Madam Speaker, we have an opportunity. It is my hope that Prime Minister, wherever he is, in whichever five-star restaurant, that the Deputy Prime Minister, wherever he is, that they would pause and consider the gravity of the challenges that face this country and work with various stakeholders to make sure that we curtail spending to avoid further taxation. We hear the voice of our people and we respond to them. And that those who are hurting, that we provide a safety net to capture them, to protect them until such time as the economy can grow and they can do it for themselves. With those few words, Madam Speaker, we support the compendium of bills.